Good morning, everyone. Or is it a good morning? I haven't quite figured out yet. I'm Tabitha Hassell with Tabs on Tap. Here we are. Happy Friday. Hopefully, you guys have had a good week. I have had a really crazy week. I probably look pretty haggard by now, and it has really been a long week. So I'm very glad that it's Friday, even though I do have to work all weekend. I see I've got my work shirt on. Still very happy, of course, for a Friday. It's going to be a beautiful day, beautiful weekend. Lots in store for us all. And, I was kind of running a little bit late for the show today because like many of you probably saw a lot of the people talking about disclosure. We talk about it on this show, particularly on Fridays, quite a bit, where we're talking about potential disclosure when it comes to UFOs, alien life, and all of these other things. And I've been reading that today was going to be the day where we're going to have the first big release of information. Of course, a lot like the Epstein files, don't expect any bombshells, of course, because they're never going to tell you what it is you think you want to know. That's not going to change. And yes, it has nothing to do with Donald Trump, but they're never going to give you full disclosure, even though we hear it's coming. But I heard it was going to come today. I didn't expect it to be this morning. I thought it would be later in the day. And so I planned on talking about what the potential disclosure could be. And then all of a sudden they released it, at around 7:30. And so I have been scrambling and rushing, trying to read through as many files as I possibly could before we had the show today. And so we're going to get into that. Some of the other things I want to jump into is of course the war with Iran has begun once again. no big no big surprise there. We're going to talk about that a little bit. And I want to talk about the Hantavirus that's going on, as you know, in the ship that has set sail never to return. So we're going to talk about that just a little bit. There are some passengers who left that ship early who of course we're trying to track down because this could be potentially a human to human spreading type of hantavirus, and we're going to talk a little bit about what that might mean. And some of those folks are here in the United States. I have no doubt they'll track them down. But is this disease X? What are they going to do to us? That's really more of the question. And normally, and it's been a crazy week. Usually I used to have a show, as you guys know. Some I know people are new, Monday through Friday every morning. And we talked a lot about news, about different things going on around the world, a lot of politics. But I feel like 3 days of politics is enough. So I've just been doing shows on Monday, Wednesday, Friday. But Wednesdays are sometimes my busiest days, of work. And I've been working in Kansas City, and so I just got back and thought, well, I'm still going to have a show today because it's Friday. Fridays are my favorite shows because I feel like we can, loosen up and talk about some crazier stuff than maybe what we would normally discuss. And I'll tell you, I don't know if any of you guys have made the trip from Kansas City, back and forth to St. Louis. It is an absolute nightmare. I didn't get home until 3 in the morning. It took me 7 hours to get home from Kansas City, and I don't really understand why. I don't understand why. It was crazy. It was like, I started the drive and my GPS doesn't help anything. I have one of those GPSs and I use Google Maps, but for whatever reason, I guess the Google Maps doesn't know where all the road closures are. And if you've taken that drive, there is nothing but road closures between Kansas City and here in the St. Louis area. So everywhere, road blockages, lane closures, detours. It was the craziest experience I think I've ever gone through. In fact, it was so bad. If you take that trip down Highway 70, it's a straight shot down 70. It should be easy if there weren't, 300-400 miles of nothing but construction. And they have it down to 2 lanes. You know how they narrow the lanes where you're driving side by side by a big tractor trailer. There's about 2 inches between you and them and a concrete barrier on either side, so you can't really move around too much. And it was so bad that I was driving through this one stretch near Boonville, and the cones, the workers had placed the cones so far over the left lane of this 2 lane roadway was closed, so it was down to 1 lane, and they placed the cones way over the white marks on the road to the right. So you kind of had to drive halfway on the shoulder, halfway in the lane. And there's a good distance between vehicles. It was later at night, so there wasn't really a lot of traffic on the road, but there was a tractor trailer in front of me, and I could see him doing what I was doing, kind of straddling that line, and all of a sudden his truck just toppled over. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I just saw that. I'm like, that's the time you need a front facing camera, right? And so his truck just toppled over, completely over on its side, thankfully out of the roadway. The driver got out and kind of moved some cones and directed me and some other drivers around. But that could have been far worse. But I will never do that again. There was a couple exits I got off because I had to stop and get gas. And it wasn't to the point where my gas light was on, nothing that was an emergency. But I got off on this exit to get gas. And and it doesn't tell you that the exit's closed. There was no sign that said exit closed. I didn't realize, I guess all the exits are closed pretty much, which is really a shame for those businesses. So I got off at the exit. I just wanted to turn right. That's all I wanted to do. I could see the gas station, it was right there. But no, because of all these ridiculous closures and construction, it routed me to the left. I couldn't go right. It was completely blocked at the top of the exit ramp. So I had to go right. And it forced me to do what? Get back on the highway going the opposite direction. So if you get at this ramp, you have no choice. You have no choice. You just have to go the opposite way on the highway. So I went back like 5 miles to the next exit, got off at that exit, tried to find a way to get back over, to go eastbound again. And there was no way. The only option was to get back going westbound once again. I have no idea who's working for MoDOT, who came up with these absolutely ridiculous construction plans, but they definitely need to go back to the drawing board because there are several exits in which you cannot get off at the exit. There's no sign telling you you can't get off at the exit. And when you do, there's no other place to go other than back the other way, going the opposite direction on the highway of where you want to go. It was the most frustrating thing I have been through in a very long time. And I was really ready. At one point, in fact, I just pulled over, when I got off at one of those exits and just sat there in this parking lot. There's nothing open at that time. And I was just like, I have no idea what to do. Like, I should just stay here. I mean, because I don't know where else to go. It was crazy. Jay says, ways, not water. Stupid. Oh, well, let me go to your first comment first, and we'll see what you were saying here. And good morning, by the way. Good morning, Joe. Good morning, Jay. Jay says, use water. Oh, use Waze. It updates in real time, and each driver can contribute in real time as well as a variety of. I didn't know that, Jay. I'm gonna have to download that. Good morning, Kim. Good morning, Layla. Good morning, Sherry. Yes, Sherry, the files have been released. We're going to be talking about that. Good morning, Karen. Like I said, some of you are just popping in. I was running about, which I'm always running late on the show, but I was definitely running late today because those files came through at 7:30, and I was doing my best. I got to power my phone off. I was doing my best to rush through the files and try to read as many as I could before the show today, because you know what an important topic this is to me, and that is disclosure, right? That's disclosure. Before I jump into disclosure, I want to talk about other couple other things first, and that is what's going on in Iran. I had hoped that Colonel Joe Adams would be able to join us today. Unfortunately, he is a very busy man. He's just not available today, understandably so. And good morning, Vernon. Vernon says, you have to be careful using Google Maps. Our freeway was closed a couple years ago, and Google Maps sent people up a road that was not good. About almost 30 cars got stuck in the snow. I don't know, probably 10 years or so ago. A friend of mine had moved out to somewhere off Harvester Road. And at that time, I wasn't really that familiar with that area, of St. Charles County. And so I was following my map. I can't remember what map service I was using. And it took me off to Boone's Crossing. Now, I was not at that time very familiar. It might have been more like 15 years ago. I wasn't that familiar with the area. And it took me down literally to the river. And it was really late at night. And had I followed my map, I would have driven directly into the river, down by the flood wall. And I'm like, I know this isn't the right way, and thank God I had enough sense about me to be like, okay, this is water. I'm going to turn around. My map has no idea what it's talking about. And that was old technology back then. And remember, there's been instances where people have listened to their map and actually driven. People would have enough common sense to say, this probably doesn't look right, but there have been cases where people have driven off, bridges under construction because they followed their GPS. Don't do that. In my case, I was leaving Kansas City and my GPS went off, and I realized like 30 minutes down the road that I was Des Moines. And you have no idea where you're going because there's no signs with all the construction. They've taken all the signs down in that area, and I finally got my GPS working again. So that took me another hour around. And no, I'm not smart enough to know my own way because I've never driven that route before. And Sandy, good morning, Sandy. Hope you're having a good morning. And so I want to talk about Iran really quick. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it because it is what it is. We've all expected this to happen. And as of yesterday, I don't know what Donald Trump, Pete Hegseth are saying today because a lot, but as of yesterday, Pete Hegseth had made a statement that anything that's going on involving the Strait of Hormuz, any of those airstrikes in the Strait of Hormuz, have nothing to do with the ceasefire. That's a whole separate issue. It is not against the ceasefire for them to fire on Iranian ships or to fire on the islands there in the Strait of Hormuz. He claims that's a totally separate issue. Well, I have to disagree. No offense to Donald Trump or to Pete Hegseth, but I have to disagree. In Iran's terms and most of the world's terms, the Strait of Hormuz has been controlled by Iran, is part of the ceasefire. And if you're, creating those strikes in that area, then yes, you have violated the ceasefire. Now, I'm not saying that the United States has violated the ceasefire. I am saying that the ceasefire is no longer in existence. You can say it's a separate issue, but it's really not. It's all part of the same deal. So as you know, yesterday there was a lot of strikes and forth, and there was so much going on and so much propaganda. It's hard to know really what happened first. But at one point, we did, fire upon some Navy or Iranian Navy vessels, and we did sink those. There were some smaller boats. I don't remember how many. Was there six that we shot at, sunk? And then, of course, they shot back at us. We did some airstrikes against one of the islands out there. They retaliated, trying to hit some of our Navy fleet vessels. And it was a lot of back and forth, back and forth. And then later yesterday, I think finally Donald Trump said, okay, enough, and we ended up striking some of their military facilities within Iran. So we can no longer say there's a separation between the ceasefire and what's going on in the Strait of Hormuz. And there was so much back and forth even this morning between Iran says this, the US says this, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And Pete Hegseth, last I saw, still saying that the ceasefire is still in existence. The ceasefire is over. It's over. I don't know where we go from here, but it's over. Good morning, Rob. Jay said they even fired on a Chinese freighter. Yeah. And Jay, they did a South Korean one as well. South Korean tanker was on fire. And Jay says, I wish they would just stop effing around and end this already. Yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you, Jay. Good morning, Linda. Yeah, this needs to be over. Come on, let's stop playing around. I don't think Donald Trump is playing around. I think that we've just been getting our ducks in a line, as I've been saying, for a couple weeks now. I think we're just trying to get everything lined out. I think we know, we the people know, of course, the Trump administration knows, Iran is never ever going to agree to end their nuclear program. That's never going to happen. They're never going to agree to stop creating, enriched uranium. It's just not going to happen. And then we have China backing them up, as you know. Their foreign minister Argachi went to meet with President Xi this week, and President Xi, after that meeting, said, "Hey, U.S., you better knock it off." And they said that Iran has every right to produce nuclear energy. So China is, of course, going to back them because they're allies. They are allies. So, of course, they're going to back each other. Now, how far is China willing to go? Russia, Putin, he's kind of kept out of it, for the most part. But, Iran, or China said that they will continue to supply Iran with components so that they can make their drones. And I don't think that will upset the Trump administration too much, just because, we are allies, of course. I don't like it. But one of our allies is Ukraine. I don't think it should be, but it is. The government. Love the people, not the government. And we have certainly supplied, of course, a lot of equipment, a lot of money, half of your paychecks to Ukraine. So I don't think that there's a lot we can say if Russia and China end up backing Iran in this situation. That's bound to happen. That's the alliances, of course, they already have formed, which I do think will change, as you probably know. And but yeah, we've got to stop. Good morning, Karen. We've just got to stop. We just have to stop. Good morning, Nancy. And it is time to end this ordeal. I'm tired of it. I'm tired of talking about it. I'm tired of playing around with the Iranian regime. I don't want to see lives lost. I'm very much against any lives being lost. And I hope that there's a way we can do it without, ending more lives. However, we're just at this impasse where we know they're not going to give up their nuclear aspirations. We cannot allow them to impasse. It's not going to change. And the only thing that Donald Trump can do, and I'm sure that this is something that's being strategized, of course, as we speak, is they've got to hit them hard. I hate to say that, but they have to hit them hard. And I don't necessarily mean the people, but their military installations, their facilities. We've got to somehow find a way to go in and get the uranium because they're not going to give it to us. We're kind of back to square one, day one, where we need a regime change. A regime change, that's something that takes decades to facilitate. I don't see that happening many years. Even if we instill somehow a new regime overnight, it's going to take a long time because there's going to be a lot of people in Iran who support the regime who are going to rise up against that, and we're setting, you can see, kind of setting everything into place. We've told Americans in Iraq to leave. You're not safe in Iraq right now because Iraq will protect Iran. There's no question about it. There will be fighting between them. Hopefully we haven't, harmed our relationship with the Kurds so much that they're not going to help us because we desperately need their help in this situation. And whether or not we're preparing for a large scale ground invasion, a minimal ground invasion, I don't know. I hear we're prepared for scale ground invasion because it is the only way. And we're doing our best to try to show the world that we're working on diplomacy. Diplomacy is not working. So therefore, we have no choice but to go in and get their uranium. And how China, President Xi coming out and saying that Iran deserves to have nuclear energy, I don't know how that's going to play into everything. I don't. China doesn't have to worry about it because they're under no threat of Iran. And quite honestly, I don't really think the United States is under direct threat either from Iran. But what I do think is that, again, they're going to hold any type of nuclear weapon. The leverage they're going to have that they'll be able to hold above us is something we cannot even begin to deal with. So the only thing we can do, remember when Donald Trump in his first term made that big statement about Afghanistan, and he's like, we're going to drop the mother of all bombs, right in the middle of the country. And guess what? He did. And we've got to do the same thing. He went in, he took care of business. We've got to do the same thing here in Iran. We've got to make sure we know where that nuclear weapon is located. We've got to break through that 100 alleged meters of concrete to get to the uranium. We've got to make sure we do so strategically, but let's quit playing around, right? Let's please quit playing around before I lose my mind. Layla says, this didn't come from my husband, but our military has been depleted under past administrations, especially the last one. So we need time to rebuild. We are short planes, etc. You're right, Layla. And I'll tell you, I've talked about this, and people on the show have been very upset with me for talking about it. Now, when I talked about this in the past, it wasn't in relation to Iran. It was people were talking about a war between the United States and China. And at the time, I said, we won't win that war against China. And quite honestly, and please don't be offended or upset that I'm saying this, it's not the first time I've said it on the show. We did not win this battle with Iran. We lost. You, we can spin it any way we want to make it look good, but we lost. We did not obtain any of our objectives. Okay, so we got rid of a few regime members. So what? There's always a bazillion things to replace them. We didn't get the uranium. We didn't get a regime change. We didn't get anything we could have possibly went in to get. And yes, we decimated to some degree a lot of their arsenal of missiles, and to some degree we got rid of some of their, not all, but some of their naval ships. and some of their mine laying. They in Iran they do have ships that lay mines, but they also have missiles that lay mines. So I know we did attack that, but in the end we came out in a much worse place than what we were, when the situation started. They should have The Trump administration should have realized, and they should have definitely gone in and secured the Strait of Hormuz before any first strike happened. And I think for whatever reason, I don't understand it. I think the Trump administration was taken by surprise that when Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz. And I don't understand that because we talked about it on this show the day before, all this happened, that they were definitely going to close the Strait of Hormuz if we went in and did any type of attack against Iran. If we knew, surely the Trump administration knew. So why didn't they secure the Strait of Hormuz first to make sure that this closure never happened? We are in a far worse place now than what we were when this entire conflict with Iran started. And that's going to continue to get worse. And Layla, to your point, when I was talking to somebody, about China, I don't remember who it was I was talking to, but when we were talking about China, I explained that, the reason it's not that our military isn't great. It's not that our military isn't better than Iranian military or even Chinese military. It's the fact that our technology is behind. We definitely do not have the drone capability that China, Russia have. We just don't have it. They are, leap years ahead of us when it comes to drone technology. We're just now starting to ramp up our drone technology under Donald Trump. We've spent all this money, billions of dollars, building these high power rockets, but we've got all this very expensive equipment, very expensive missiles. And here we have Iran, throwing out missiles. Allegedly they produce 400 a day that cost them about, what was it, $20,000 each, something along those lines. We cannot compete with that because we just had Joe Biden as our president, and Joe Biden defunded our defense department. We were not creating new weapons with Joe Biden over, this country. I should say the auto pen ruling this country. And the biggest point that I've always made is that our fuel reserves are depleted. And that again happened under Joe Biden. We don't have the fuel, the jet fuel, to go to war. And we don't have a way to make it quick enough to go to a significant war. And Layla, I don't know if you've heard that about the jet fuel, but that's been an ongoing problem. And Jay says at this point, I think there's more than one group trying to play leader in Iran. I agree, Jay, because there's one group that is talking to the Trump administration, and that group is trying to work out diplomacy. But then you got this other group and that's why there's so much back and forth. The other group says, oh, we're not talking to the United States because it's not them. And then the guy who was talking to the United States, if you recall, they tried to assassinate him. Remember, we talked about it on the show, and they blew up the guy's house, and he was injured severely, not killed, but injured severely. And so that he was the former foreign minister, and he is no longer talking to the United States. He's in a very bad position after they attempted to assassinate him. So those talks broke down, and there is no diplomacy. There are two different groups trying to run things, and one wants to work with the United States, one doesn't, and they're fighting for power within their own country. Because I do think that the Khomeini's son, little Khomeini Jr., is seriously injured. He have lost one or both legs in that initial explosion that killed his father. Have been constantly fighting a battle, within themselves. But I don't know what we're going to do here, quite honestly. And I agree, Layla. We are rebuild during this time, but I don't think we can do it fast enough or extensively enough to win this situation. The only way I think we're ever going to win this conflict in Iran is if we drop another MOAB, right in a very strategic location to set them back, as Donald Trump says, 10 years into the past, or knock out their power grid or something very significant. But then we've got to remember, if we do that, if we knock out their power grid, if we set them back 10 years, 20 years, according to Donald Trump and what their capabilities are, that's going to really hurt the people. We're talking about famine, we're talking about a refugee crisis. So there's a lot of fine lines to kind of work around. But I hate to say it because I know people take it the wrong way. It's not that I don't think our military is superior. We have the best military in the entire world. They're the men and women who work and for us every single day who preserve our freedom, they don't get any better than that. Was is under Joe Biden, our military became weak. We had a lot of folks joining the military. Unfortunately, I think a lot of them were joining the military for the wrong reasons, because if back under Biden, if you join the military, the government would pay for your sex change surgery. Remember that for your so we had a lot of people joining the military for those reasons. Now, that's just a very small group, a very small percentage. I don't think that puts our national security at risk in any way. But we also know that the government under Joe Biden worked really hard to turn people against the Trump administration, or Donald Trump at the time. And we know they worked really hard to weed out the conservatives and the people who were Republicans or people who would fight for our freedom. And they were pretty successful with it, quite honestly, because when they came out and they told a lot of our service members that they had no choice but to get the COVID vaccine, a lot of them left early as soon as they possibly could. They were out of there dishonorably because they refused to get the shot, and some of them did it because they had no other choice. And then a lot of them got the vaccine and became sick and ended up having to leave for those reasons. So that kind of put us in a very vulnerable position, unfortunately. And when you have 4 years under Biden where he defunded our Defense Department and took away a lot of the resources we would normally have, and they didn't do those typical preparations for going into war, that really sets us back. There's no question about it. Not that we don't have the best military in the world. Unfortunately, we're just not ready. We're just not ready. And Jay says the Kurds stole the weapons intended for the Iranian people. I don't know, Jay. I that story. If you've been on my social media page, I've had a lot of open conversation with Kurds on Facebook, and they all say that that's not true. Now, of course, they're not going to tell us if it is true, but the way that I understood it, and we kind of played it out real time on the show when it was happening, is that we, the United States, did supply the Iraqi Kurds. There's two different Kurds groups. There's Kurds in Iran, there's the Kurds in Iraq, and they're part of the same group. They just unfortunately don't have a home. The Kurds living in Iran typically don't get involved in any type of battle. That's where, they're just living their lives, trying to work and supply the Kurds in Iraq, who are the ones who are willing to go into battle. So the Iraqi Kurds were given weapons from the United States. They were meeting with Iranian people. They were assisting with the uprising. And they were supposed to, of course, give those weapons to the Iranian people so they could use those weapons against the Iranian regime to, of course, destabilize the country and basically, stage a coup. And it didn't really work out. Now, a lot of those weapons did make their way in, but what they didn't expect is that, of course, the Iranian regime knew exactly what was going on. And they did one of two things. Well, they did two of two things, I should say. And what they did is, of course, as we know very publicly, they came out and slaughtered the Iranian people that were rising up against the regime. And in many horrific ways, I watched countless videos, and I think that's why I was so upset. And I used to defend the Iranian regime. Never will I do that again. They were running people over in vehicles. They were just shooting into crowds and, just killing, thousands of people at a time. They were going into the hospitals where the wounded were taken and assassinating them in the hospital. There's videos of it. There's proof of it. It's not AI. Some people say upwards of 80,000 people, were killed or missing during those uprisings. So that's one thing they did. The other thing they did is they found out, of course, what the Iraqi Kurds were doing. And they went to as the Iraqi Kurds, here and there would be coming and approaching the border, they were stopping them first and executing them. And that was a very difficult situation. Now, the Kurds, if you talk to any of them, they say no, they want because they want a country to call their own. They know if we instill a new regime, whether that be, Donald Trump running the show, whether that be the former Shah, whoever that might be, they're going to give the Kurds their own country, their own land to live on within that Iranian border, which is all they want. They're willing to do anything they can to get that land to call their own. And we really screwed them over in Syria. So I'm surprised they talk to us at all, quite honestly. And John says, not 400 missiles per day was drones. Oh, yeah. Sorry, John. You're correct. Thank you for that correction. 400 drones per day. I think it was what, 25 missiles per day at 400 per day. Thank you for that. And Layla says, I have heard that about the jet fuel. Biden's auto pen took down the military even under Obama. Remember when we couldn't get ammunition? He gave it to Iran, I'm sure. Yeah, he probably did. Good morning, Kevin. And yep, you're right. Obama sent a plane full of money because you know why? Because Obama represents the Muslim Brotherhood. That's exactly why. And yes, we funded the uranium, of course, that Iran has and how they're building their nuclear weapons. You think about how many missiles and how many drones they were able to build, that big pallet of cash that Obama gave. So easy situation here. And I think maybe that's why full scale against Iran, and that's where the propaganda comes in. Because I know here in the United States, we have our own propaganda machine, and my buddies over at CENTCOM don't like it when I say this, but we have our own propaganda machine. There's no question about it. If they do attack, you'll hear Iranian news saying, "Oh, we hit the USS Abraham Lincoln." U.S. CENTCOM comes out. Now they won't say, "Oh no, that didn't happen," but they'll kind of dance around it and they'll say, "Oh well, the USS Abraham Lincoln, it's on another mission, but it's still working hard for this, and that." But yes, it was hit, and of course, CENTCOM will never admit to that. They won't deny it, but they won't admit to it. And I think Iran has got in some really good strikes on us that we haven't been willing to admit. And I do think that they absolutely decimated our bases across the Middle East. They absolutely destroyed them. They are no longer there. I've watched countless videos of our own troops, hiding in bunkers because they have, of course, have no choice. It's not a bad thing to say about them, but they have missiles just falling down upon them and some very close calls. I've heard that we had more casualties than what we admit to, more injuries than what we admit to. And I've seen the videos, and I'm not saying by any means or that I believe Iranian propaganda, but when you see the videos are clearly not AI, then you kind of know that there's a little bit of propaganda going on both sides. Both sides embellish, both sides deny, and that's just the way war is these days. But when there's instant news and you can see a video and see on the ground coverage of different things, it's kind of tough sometimes to keep that propaganda going. And let's see. John says, was estimated building 300 to 400 missiles per month. Thank you for that, John. And whatever it is, it's far above what we're making and for much cheaper than what we're able to make with, of course, China giving them a lot of that a lot of those components. And Layla says, true. I heard our own military flew pallets of cash to Iran in US $100 bills under Obama. Military by this millions of dollars. You got that right, Layla. I can't remember what show I was on at that time, but that definitely did happen. So we'll see how things play out over the coming days. Whether this weekend, do things escalate? Do they stay the same? I don't feel like we're in a full out conflict right now. That could change at any moment. But right now, I think we're just kind of showing Iran that, hey, if you keep the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, we're going to attack your ships. We're going to attack the island. We're going to, and our goal, I think, is to hurt them financially. Because right now, Iran is being hurt financially because their tankers are not able to leave the Strait of Hormuz. We will not allow that to happen. And so, therefore, I've heard that they're shutting down oil production because their reserves are full. They have nowhere to go from here, and they have no way to transport any of that oil, or gasoline, different byproducts they make out of the country. So we're trying to hit them hard financially. There's some strikes kind of going back and forth. I don't think we're going to see real major escalation until we have a little bit more of our own ducks in a row. And I don't think we're quite there yet, but I think we're pretty close. Pretty darn close. And Jay says the flip side, we don't need cheap drones either with our superiority and technologies. I don't know, Jay. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I would like to say that's true, that the flip side of that is that we do have amazing technology here in the United States. We've all talked about the directed energy weapons. Okay, well, why aren't we using them? If we have the technology for direct energy weapons, Why aren't we using it? Maybe there hasn't been a reason why we did. We heard, about some of what was coming out from Maduro's camp in Venezuela and some of the technology we use. But then the other side, some people say that's just a bunch of BS, and we're really just trying to make it, kind of up that to scare the other potential enemies that we really didn't use that type of technology. We have what they call the Havana syndrome technology, where it's some type of sonic weapon, that put some kind of pressure on the body through radio waves, and it causes bad headaches, nosebleeds, brain injury, and so on. I believe those weapons exist, where we haven't had reason to use them or a way to use them in Iran yet. And that's part of the issue. Without boots on the ground, a lot of our technology is really useless. A lot of it depends on very close facilities, close encounters. I don't know what word to use exactly, but I don't know. I'm sure we have technology I'm not even aware of, but we haven't used it in Iran. If we have it, we're not using it. So I would like to know why we aren't using it. I think what we is Russia created the Oreshnik. Remember the Oreshnik missile? Kind of a medium to long range missile. And what's so interesting about that Oreshnik? They used it, I believe, twice now in Ukraine, maybe once, maybe twice. And it's pretty fascinating because it's actually better than a nuclear weapon. It's more powerful than a nuclear weapon. When that Oreshnik hits its target, it disintegrates everything. It pulverizes concrete. I mean, if you see the Oreshnik missile hit, let's say there's a concrete building, it would be nothing but dust. But there's no fallout like you have with a nuclear weapon. So, it's kinetic energy. It's just as powerful, if not more powerful, without the nuclear fallout. And if we had something like that, if we had access to something like that, I hope that that's something we're building. I heard that we had some hypersonic missiles that were being transferred to Israel to use against Iran. But the problem is, if you do your research on hypersonic missiles, we have never successfully been able to use a hypersonic missile. It's unfortunate, but our technology is not where it should be because Democrat rule. When Democrats are ruling the Defense Department, guess what? None of this stuff is being made, tested, and it sets us back quite a bit. And let's see here. John says Obama sent about 1.7 billion in cash to Iran. Biden removed a lot of sanctions against Iran, allowing Iran to make hundreds of billions more. To that, right, John? Jay says you only use what's necessary. Once you do, the cat's out of the bag. Also true, Jay. And John says Israel has been knocking down drones with super cheap lasers. And Jay says, I promise we have things we don't know about. Because especially, and that's why I'm not going to talk about the missing or dead scientists right now. We'll talk about that. We have talked about it. We'll talk about it on other shows. We've got a lot more to talk about in a very short amount of time today. But one of the things they had in common is a lot of them worked with nuclear fusion, nuclear energy, and there's something to that. I don't know what, but that's one of the common denominators with those. And so therefore, it leads me to believe that we do have technology that we don't know about related to nuclear fusion. I certainly know they've been working on it, and in a far more capacity than anything we've heard publicly or in the past that we've used when it comes to nuclear weapon. Nuclear weapons is not new, clearly, but there's new technology being applied. And China, I think, is a little bit ahead of us when it comes to nuclear fusion and some of the weapons they apparently are making. But either way, enough about Iran today. We'll pick this up. On Monday we'll have Colonel Joe Adams hopefully with us on Monday, kind of sort things out, see what happens this weekend. Two other things I want to get to today because we just have to. We just got to do it. One is, of course, guess what? Today, disclosure day, even though it's really not. It was kind of the day when we talked about, oh, the Epstein files are going to be released. And we see all of our, Pam Bondi and all those other folks jumping up and down with their little binders. Oh, today's the day we're going to release the Epstein files. No, it was stuff that had been released, like 12 years before. Nothing too different with what we're seeing today with the UFO disclosure. I kept hearing it was coming today. I posted this morning about it. About 15 minutes after I made I received the first link, to the government database with all those files. I didn't have much time. I was running late on the show this morning. I got started a little bit late because I was trying to look through the files as close as I could. But here's the thing when it comes to disclosure. And oh, that's right, Nancy, happy Mother's Day weekend. I did remember it was another Mother's Day weekend. I should have mentioned it earlier. Yes, and happy Mother's Day to all of you mothers, of course. Whether it's furry mothers to furry children or to human children, either way. And so the disclosure files, I was looking through them. The only thing that I thought was really fascinating, and I haven't looked through them all, is a lot of us have asked the question, well, if there's really extraterrestrial life and there's really UFOs and UAPs, why haven't astronauts talked about it? Why haven't more pilots talked about it? And one thing that came out of this is they have, and they do. And I looked through just about every space mission we've had here in the United States, going back in the files that I saw. There's probably a lot of other ones going back to like the 60s. There were astronauts who did report seeing various anomalies. I tried to save some of it here, but my computer was kind of not working with me today. So I don't know if it's here. I'm going to read this. Here's one of the letters of disclosure, but I'm going to talk about a different kind of disclosure here in just a moment. Now, this is redacted. I'm going to read this best I can. One of the documents, and this is more recent, 2023. You can go back to the files. I shared it on my Facebook page. It's just basically, what is it? War.gov, I think. You can go on and read these files. This is a redacted document. This is the type of thing you're going to see. A lot of it's redacted. And it basically says on September 2023, the FBI special agent blank interviewed blank via FaceTime video, lots and lots of blanks. They sat in the interview. Let's see here. At that time of the interview, after being advised of the identity of the interviewing agents and the nature of the interview, blank provided the following information. It says blank, blank, blank was a blank in the blank, a member of the military, I'm sure, since blank, and has 10 to 15 hours as a drone pilot. And this is kind of interesting, but this is very much a common what you're saying. On September 2023, blank was a blank receiving a blank. Of the five of them got into three vehicles. Somebody was driving the first vehicle and somebody was her passenger. The three vehicles began driving south around 7:30 a.m. The sun was in the east with good visibility. The three vehicles came to a gate that was giving them trouble. At about 3/4 of the windshield up, blank saw a linear object with a super bright light on the east side of the object. The light was a bright white, super bright light on the east side of the object. The light. Oh, sorry, I'm not reading this very well. They saw a linear object with a super bright light out of the east side of the object. The light was bright white and bright enough to see bands within the light. The object was metallic gray in color. I'm assuming this is the cigar shaped object we hear so much of. It did not have any wings or exhaust. The object was smaller than a 737, 1 to 2 Black Hawk helicopters in length, and was definitely bigger than a drone. The object was approximately 5,000 feet above ground level and moved east to west parallel to the ground. The object was visible for 5 to 10 seconds, and the light went out and the object vanished. The sky was clear and couldn't find the object again. So, no big bombshells. Everything I read was just like this report. A lot of blankety blank blank blanks. Saw this, saw that, bright lights, UFOs, UAPs. If you go to MUFON, you'll probably see a lot more detailed accounts than what you're going to see in these files. But I do think it was fascinating that they did, talk about the Apollo flights and some of these other things, and that we were at least able to see that. There we are. I'll mess up. I can't find myself. But here's what I want to talk about. I don't care about these government files. They're not going to tell you the truth right now. What I am hearing that I do is allegedly a group of pastors, or I should say religious leaders, were allegedly briefed in the White House recently about upcoming disclosures. And the story goes that these religious leaders were briefed, and what the government was explaining to them that, hey, we're going to start releasing this information. The first release is going to be today. And then from there, we're going to continue to release information. At some point, and there's a lot of people saying this is true, even though at this time we'll have to use allegedly, that within the next 60 to 90 days, we're going to have some type of disclosure by the government, not just the government, that we have, but true disclosure that's going to really shake the religious community, where people are really about their faith and they're going to start wondering, where did life really begin? True to these religious leaders coming, your people are going to really start questioning. A lot of them are going to leave the faith altogether. A lot of them are no longer going to believe that there is a God, that there is a Jesus, and it's going to really cause some problems, worldwide. It could potentially cause panic, but more than anything, it's going to cause people to question their religious beliefs. Now, we've talked about that, a lot on the show and what that could possibly mean. And I think it's going to mean something different to everyone. And if you go and you watch the testimonies we've talked about so much, the David Garushes, I'm going to show it one testimony here in just a moment. If even Tucker Carlson, I know a lot of people are very angry with Tucker Carlson right now, but if you go back and you look at Tucker Carlson's interviews and where he talks about UFOs, super dimensional beings, or some people, aliens, most people believe are, extra dimensional, super dimensional beings, of course, you're going to start thinking about, all right, well, how does any of this make sense? And I think, and this is just me talking, not anything anybody has necessarily told me, just a compilation of things I've heard, is a lot of these beings have been here all this time. They've been here on earth. A lot of people want to say, oh, it's angels and demons. Well, what if we follow the evolutionary? I believe, I know that, don't hate me for this. I believe in evolution. And the reason why I believe in evolution, I'm still believe in God. I still believe in Jesus. And I still, of course, believe the Bible, but a lot of people believe that there are books removed from the Bible, books that talked about exactly, what we would consider disclosure. And if you were to go back and read, this, I know some people say the Book of Enoch, there's a couple different excerpts you can go back and look at. But if you really think about it, and the way I look at it, and again, don't hate me for saying this, but when I take the Bible, and I've read the Bible many times, I feel like the Bible is telling us a story, but I don't necessarily take it word for word. I don't necessarily believe that the earth was created, let's say, in 7 days and 7 nights. Maybe 7 days and 7 nights in biblical terms is really 7 billion years. I do believe that humanity once started out as a microbe and then grew and formed and changed and evolved over time. And I do believe that through that process of evolution, that different species began to evolve. Some species didn't make it, some continued to evolve, some continued to grow and shape and form, and that's why we see the pattern. I don't have to take you through the lesson of evolutionary science, but I think it's possible to believe a combination of religion and science. I don't think that makes you a bad person. I don't think it makes you any less Christian to believe a combination of science and religion. And what if Adam and Eve took billions of years to create? What if God, what if God, because there is a God, I have no doubt in my mind there is a God. So let's say, and I do absolutely believe there is a heaven, and I honestly do believe there's a hell as well. Maybe not in the terms that everybody else does, but what if God created man and woman, but it just took millions of years for us to evolve from one species to what we are today? And I think that geology, you can go back and look at geology, archaeology. There's a lot of things you can go back and look at that kind of prove the theory of evolution. And that really the earth is many billions of years old, maybe infinitely old. And that maybe aliens are former civilizations. Maybe they evolved way ahead of us. That's the way I've always thought about it, is some of, not all of them, but some of these beings evolved way ahead of us. They came before us. And that what we see now, they might look like, reptilians. Maybe the reptilians evolved from a reptile, and that is what they evolved to be. And it happened long before us. Maybe we're a newer species, on the chain. Those are just my personal thoughts I'm throwing out there. And Jay says that's not evolution, that's creation. And John says there are 22 books removed from the Bible. The Ethiopian Bible is the full Bible. John, and I've not read that. I need to do that. And John, one day we should talk about evolution. Yeah, my thoughts on evolution are not fully formed. I don't put a whole lot of thinking into it, but I've always believed that what we consider to be aliens or extraterrestrials are really one of two things: either humans that continued to evolve and somehow found a way, found a way to time travel. And so a lot of what we see, a lot of the UFOs, a lot of the spaceships we see are actually future humans who have traveled back to probably look at a lot of the mistakes we made, maybe to come back and fix things. Think about that. If we as humans continue to evolve and we let's say 500 500 years from now, technology is moving pretty quick. I could say 5,000 years from now, 10,000 years, 20,000 years from now. Hopefully, the world will continue to go on. And as humans evolve, we're going to have new technology. And there is going to probably be a point in time in the future where we're going to be able to find that technology to time travel. And in the future, when we start time traveling, we'll be able to go back and look at the history books and we'll say, okay, in the year, 2019, 2020, there was a virus called COVID. And maybe there's a way that maybe we don't know the full scope. Maybe COVID was really something crazier than what we think. I'm kind of kidding here, but just using this as an example. And maybe those folks from the future came back and said, all right, we're going to put an end to this COVID because it ended up causing all this disaster and all of these problems, and these number of people survived, and let's go back and change history. I don't know. I'm just talking. But I think it works something like the problem with evolution is there is no missing link found, and the bone evidence they tout doesn't even cover a pool table. Well, Jay, bone breaks down over time. As we know, it'll turn to dust eventually. And I really do think that if we dug down, the problem, and I've talked about this before, is that we dig down, everything's underneath, it's below us. Okay, centuries upon centuries upon centuries, millions to billions of years is under the very place we're standing. We just can't see it. We can't get to it. It's way down there. And what happens is you have these archaeology digs, and they dig so far, and then they find a beautiful, let's say, terrace, or they find this beautiful old stadium, from the Roman period. Well, then they stop digging because they think, okay, civilization, this is what we were looking for. Here it is. And then they don't dig down any further. When in fact, if they kept digging and weren't concerned about, preserving that site, I think they would find a lot of other civilizations have existed before. Now, some of those civilizations may have had better technology than we have now. There's really no way to know. And I do think that that humans are not the only species to evolve. Maybe that's why you have the reptilian people. Maybe that's why you have the some people say the praying mantis creature. And I know I sound crazy. It's Friday. I'm allowed to sound crazy on a Friday. I can put my tinfoil hat on. But we have all these whistleblowers who are renowned people who aren't crazy, people who aren't mentally ill, people who have spent their lives dedicated to this country, and those people come forward and they say, yes, I have seen, and they call it biologics. I have seen the biologics. I know they exist. I have seen the extraterrestrial life. I have seen the spaceship with my own eyes. Then you really have to, I think, start to wonder, okay, there's so much more here than we know. Where did it all begin? And if you really listen to a lot of these people, there are a lot of experts who say, well, some of these beings have always been here. They've always been here. They have military bases under the oceans and the deep sea where we've never even been able to explore, or deep under earth. But if you think about it, we call it deep under earth, but at one time that was the surface of the earth. Where we stand today, in 5 billion years from now, it's not going to be here today. My house is not going to be here. Eventually, as the time goes on, what happens is everything disintegrates and continues to build up, up, up. So who knows what things are going to look like, in 10 billion years from now. We living under the ground if we continued to move on, if the world didn't build up around us. I don't know, where I'm going with all this, but I wanted to show a video. I don't care what the government says. And all these disclosure files, just like the Epstein files, are going to tell you what they want you to know. Listen to the other people. There's so much whistleblower testimony out there. People who were there, people who saw it, people who worked on these projects, people who know. A lot of them have disappeared. Most of them haven't. And they all have a lot to say. Jay says there's also a strong tinfoil population too. Also true, Jay. But I believe that some of these people truly have seen what they think they have seen. Lori says it is also mind-boggling. Faith in God is the only guarantee. I would love to understand everything, but there are too many rabbit holes. There are, Lori, a lot of rabbit holes. But I do believe it's possible to keep your faith, to remain a Christian, to believe in God, to believe in Jesus, believe everything you've been taught, and yet also you can also still believe in the science of maybe creation and how we became what we are today, and maybe what other beings are too. I'm going to play this quick video for you here in just a moment. I don't have a ton of time today, but this is Dr. Rogers. He was a retired U.S. Air Force flight surgeon, NASA's former chief of aerospace medicine, and he's now a board member of the UFO Bureau. 33 years. Think about that. He and so many like him, 33 years this guy has waited to tell you the truth. And people say, why are all these whistleblowers coming forward? Because think about that. If you knew all of this information, you've seen it with your own eyes, you've worked on it, you've investigated, you've got all this information, but you're not allowed to tell anyone. Finally, you say, hey, we're heading towards disclosure. Maybe some of the things I've seen that I've always wanted to tell but couldn't, because of my commitment to the United States, and our national security, now I'm able to talk. And a lot of people say, hey, you know what? I know this and everyone else should know too. So I'm going to play this quick video here for you. It's a very short video. There's more about Dr. Rogers online.
Oh, I'm Dr. Gregory Rogers again. I'm surprised at how all of this is turning out. But I want to emphasize the fact that I waited 33 years between the time that I saw the reverse engineered flying saucer that was being tested and before I came forward with my story. It is not an easy story to tell. There have been persecutions and things done against me since I've told this story that I don't want to go into. But it's important for the American public to realize that even when we have government agencies like Arrow that are saying they're telling us the truth, they're doing all this research, the fact of the matter is that this is just a glorified, updated version of Project Blue Book. They are not telling us the truth. They do not want people coming forward. And I find this very disturbing. I was disappointed in the last congressional hearing on UAPs. So I'm going to keep speaking out over this platform. So I hope people find it helpful and they listen to what I tell them. Thank you very much. I will be back again.
I think you should follow Dr. Rogers and see what he's got to say, because I think I think his information is interesting. I've seen some of his other videos. And let's see. John says Russia has been very open about UFO interference with nuclear missiles silos. Yes. And we've seen a lot of that information from different people and, in different countries as well as even in the United States. Jay says Coster site in Illinois was 35 foot deep, which corresponds to occupation of 8,500 years ago. Yeah, not too long ago. Remember, there was a skull found in Illinois. I can't recall exactly where, and or maybe it was on the border of Illinois, Indiana, where that year, something like that, using to some people. But we can't think that man is only a couple thousand years old. I mean, man has been evolved for probably, many thousands of years, and maybe we were evolved and then something catastrophic happened, not just the Noah's flood, but other things as well, and we died back a little bit and reemerged and continued to evolve from where we were to what we are now. I mean, it's kind of funny because I always grew up believing that we all started out as cavemen and then eventually evolved to where we are. And then if you think that that's possible, and that's something maybe you've always believed, then it shouldn't be that hard to believe that other species have evolved as well. Maybe lizards, frogs evolved, maybe praying mantises evolved. I've heard ants are a big one that maybe, have evolved into something different. Take a, there's a guy named Perry Stone. I would look up Perry Stone. He released a YouTube video. He's an evangelist and book author. He's one of the people who is made a YouTube video talking about how Secretary of War Pete Hegseth called all of the evangelists, all of the religious leaders, all of the pastors, ministers from different parts of the world, all or different parts of the United States, sorry, into a meeting, talk to them about religion and how these declassifications are going to eventually affect religion and how people think. So you can go out, you can watch his YouTube video. He talks about that meeting and some of the things that he learned in that meeting and how he's handling it with his own, believers and I don't know what kind of church he runs, but whatever folks he's got. I'm starting to lose my voice. And so before we go, I know I'm way over my time, but I did start a couple minutes late today. I wanted to talk about that hantavirus very quickly. Now, don't panic. Don't freak out. Now, hantavirus, I'm going to tell you right now, absolutely terrifies me. Terrifies me. There's only two viruses that really concern me. COVID is not one of them. I worry about Ebola because it sounds horrific. I worry about hantavirus because it also sounds horrific. And hantavirus, generally speaking, for you to contract hantavirus, it's through mouse droppings, rat droppings, rodent droppings. So they have their droppings create dust, and that dust is something that you inhale. Now, not all rodents are infected, of course, with hantavirus, but those that are, and then you end up breathing in the dust from those droppings and you develop hantavirus, starts out as a respiratory infection. And if you recall, remember the actor Gene Hackman, his wife died from hantavirus in their new, right outside, I believe, of Albuquerque. They found that they had an outbuilding where his wife did a lot of work. She did gardening and different things out there, storage facility and so on. And it had tested positive for the hantavirus in some of the rodent droppings. And she inhaled it, had severe respiratory issues because of that. She passed away. And then, of course, when she passed away, Gene didn't have anybody to take care of him. And he also, perished as a result of not having a caretaker. And so that was a, horrific case. And hantavirus has always scared me. I remember reading, gosh, many years ago about these cabins in Colorado. And there were people staying in these cabins. Some were workers, some were just tourists. And a couple of different cabins, they developed virus and passed away from it. And ever since then, it's been absolutely terrifying to me. But I've always thought, well, at least hantavirus, you have to actually be where the rodent droppings are to get the hantavirus. So, I always think, well, if I'm free of rodent droppings, I don't have to worry about getting it. But there is one version. There was a ship, the Hondius, that sailed away from Argentina. And as you probably know, the situation on the cruise ship is that at first there was 3 passengers who got sick. They tested positive for hantavirus. Well, what's interesting is in the country of Argentina, there is a different type of hantavirus, and it's called I don't know the full name of it. I call it the Andres version, ANDRES version, and that is human to human spread. And that's very unusual. So you're going to pick up let's say you're going to breathe in the dust from the rodent droppings, but this particular version of the hantavirus does spread from human to human, which is extremely rare. It's extremely rare. And it's highly unfortunate that a couple people on this cruise ship ended up contracting that particular hantavirus strain. And it has been spreading through the ship. Every day I'm reading about new cases. But here's what's crazy is some of those passengers left early. There were 40 passengers of the cruise ship that left early. And so they've been working hard to track those 40 down. 7 of them were Americans and have come back to the United States. And of course, we all know what's probably coming. They're going to say, oh my gosh, these 7 people back in the United States, they were on airplanes, they were shopping, they're in close, maybe with children, close contact with kids who are going to schools. Don't fall for the propaganda. Don't fall for the fear factor. Okay, do not do that. It will be contained if for some reason there is any potential spread, which I highly doubt, but if there is, don't panic. The only thing you need to tell yourself is never again, never again, never again will we allow them to do to us what they did during COVID. We will not have closed nursing homes. We will not have closed schools. We will not be wearing a mask everywhere we go. We are going to put our feet down and we're going to say, not going to happen. You're never doing that to us again. So start thinking about it, start practicing, because I think we know where they're going with this. And it will never, ever happen again. Jay says, one more reason not to take a cruise. I've never been on a cruise. And Ruth says, you're following over on YouTube. Good morning, Ruth. Happy weekend, she says to all. Best wishes to those celebrating Mother's Day. And same to you, Ruth. Layla says, God never said we were the only ones. And why are there other planets in our solar system? Also, different topic, tick infestation. I want to talk about the ticket. Layla, I wasn't planning on talking about that, but we are going to talk about that. Jay says there are places where human footprints have been found with dinosaur footprints. I've seen those photos. And yeah, Kim, you know it. We are never, ever, we're not going to do it, Kim. We're just not going to do it. And that's the main reason why I want to talk about this hantavirus. I've been following the case. It kind of reminds me of COVID. I started following COVID whenever it was in China, and we were watching videos of people in China standing at the bus stop and just falling over. And I remember thinking, man, what is going on over in China? And I was tracking the cases, and I can remember, a case would pop up, in Cambodia or here or there. And then I remember, I think it was on February 5th of 2020, either February 5th or February 7th, one of those days. All of a sudden, there was case number one in the United States, and it all went downhill from there. To do that to us again, I don't care if it's Ebola. I don't care how deadly or scary a disease is. We're not going to allow them to do that to us again. And what I mean by do that to us again, I mean force us to do things that violate our freedom. That's what I mean. If you're worried and you're worried yourself that you might get sick from hantavirus or from something else, take your own precautions. If you want to go and get your vaccine, have at it. Do what you need to do for yourself. I believe in the freedom of choice, not mandates, the freedom of choice. I'm not telling anybody don't wear a mask, don't get your vaccine or whatever it is you want to do. I'm actually not anti-vax person, but I do believe that there are vaccinations that come out, such as the COVID vaccination, and I don't think it was meant for everybody. I think it was meant for some people. There are some vulnerable populations that maybe they should have gotten the COVID vaccine. My own son's father, wasn't even at an at-risk place, and he passed away from COVID. I know it's a very real virus. There's no question. And what these people are dealing with, the hantavirus, is also very real, and it could start spreading in the United States, but that doesn't mean they can force us. They can force us and tell us what to do and take away our freedoms. So we cannot forget that. And Layla says, never ever. We said no. Don, you got that right. Jay says, I swear I had it before the anniversary here. I was sick 2 weeks with all the symptoms. Me too, Jay. In October, some of my friends don't like it when I tell this story. In October of 2019, I went to a party. I'm not going to talk about the details of that party. It was just a dinner party, nothing crazy. But a friend of ours, a mutual friend, who is a medical professional, he was just on a tour in Asia. He was in China. He was in Cambodia. He was in Vietnam. He was in all these places. And he's a very fit and healthy person. Well, that night at that dinner party, he was so tired. He didn't feel good. He actually ended up falling asleep. And I kid you not, 3 days later, we all got sick. And we had all the same symptoms of COVID. And I remember talking to so many friends of mine. They're in, and I kind of joke with that friend. I call him patient number one, and he does not like it at all. So I will not be talking about him in relation to it. But I will tell you that a lot of people at that time in October, November of 2019 were really sick. I remember when I had it, every muscle in my entire body hurt. I remember even my fingers hurt, my fingertips. And I didn't have the respiratory issues or anything like that, but every inch of my body hurt. And I can remember being just overwhelmingly tired. And I remember like just sleeping, for about 3 days. And then all of a sudden one day I just felt so much better. Everything was great. And then the next day I was back down again for that last week. And all my friends had the same thing. They had this 2 weeks where they were really sore. Some of them had respiratory issues. One great day where everything felt great, and then a worse week. It was the strangest thing ever. But I do believe we all had it at that time. And I will always believe, and there's been some proof since then, that it actually started spreading in the United States around September, October of 2019. So by the time that the vaccines came out, guess what? We were already mostly immune to it. We'd already reached that herd immunity. Jay says, my doctor told me I was crazy until we look back at my visit and he reread these notes. Yeah, exactly, Jay. I went to the doctor too back then because it was causing me some heart arrhythmias back in 2019. And I always wonder, like, here the hospital was full of all these different people having the same problems and symptoms that I was having. There was no doubt in my mind that it was here long before it was ever discussed. And you know what? We just got to make sure we put our foot down. We say, not again, not going to happen again, because we are not going to fall for it again. And then Layla, oh, you were talking about ticks. So here's something interesting about ticks this year is my cousin's granddaughter. I'm trying to think of how to phrase that. She's 12. And I got to be careful. I don't want to violate her privacy, but she ended up being very ill. She had a fever. She had a blister on her foot. Her mother took her to the hospital and they said, okay, we don't know what's going on here, but let's do some testing, figure out why, she's so ill. Well, they ended up sending her to Children's Hospital. It turns out she has an illness from a tick bite. I know, I don't know if she was bitten by the tick on her foot and that's why she had the blister on her foot, but either way, she's been in Children's Hospital for several days fighting a very serious tick-borne illness, but they're not calling it Lyme disease. They're not really giving it a name. They're just saying it is a illness caused by a tick bite, and she's been very, very sick again in Children's Hospital. But here's what's interesting about coming out of that is that I read online, and a couple people have told me that the government is asking for ticks. That if you find a tick, put it in an envelope, contact your local health department, and they will come and pick up the tick in the baggie and they want to send them in for observation. There is apparently some new tick disease this is what people are telling me, that there's a new tick disease going around and they're what it is, where it's coming from. And they want you to take your tick and they want you to seal it in a bag, call your local health department and turn that tick in so they can find out and try to track where this is coming from. It is so crazy to me to even think about. And what's funny is I was out weeding one of the flower beds and I came in the house and I had a tick on my neck. And I remember I told my mom, I'm like, gosh, this was before I even found out about my cousin's daughter. And I said, gosh, I had a tick on me, from the flower bed. I hate ticks. I'm terrified of them. But here's what, thank God I got it. It didn't, as far as I know, bite me or cause me any problems. And that was before I knew to save the tick and turn it in. So my tick met an untimely death and did not get turned into the health department. But, take your precautions, put on your spray, make sure you don't get those ticks, and make sure you take care of your animals too. Because if you have animals, pets, and they're out, in the grass and the trees, wherever you might live, and they're bringing the ticks back into the house, you don't want that to happen either. And you also don't want them to get a disease. So do your best to provide that tea and flick, flea and tick prevention to your pets, and make sure you do the same thing for yourself. When I find out more about this tick-borne illness, I will definitely let you guys know. And Jay says you went for a week with no taste. I never lost my taste. I never had any symptoms. At one point, I went and on the old show I was on, we tested for antibodies, and some of us had antibodies. I was one of those. And so I felt, well, I already had the antibodies, never felt sick a day other than what happened in 2019. So I felt like I was fine and have been fine since. I get hiccups. And then Karen, when I got COVID, I was so sick. I went to the hospital and they told me to leave because I didn't get the shot. Are you serious, Karen? That's crazy. And now, of course, they're scrambling to find people to donate blood and plasma, people who were not vaccinated, the magic blood, as we call it. And Layla says, my doctor didn't pressure me and told me that he was forced to take it. Told me a lot. Yeah, same here, Layla. I didn't have my hair's a mess. I have like a colic right here and it always drives me insane. None of my doctors ever pressured me to go and get the vaccine. Most of them never even said much at all. John says in October 2019, I was so sick, like I had never been before for a few weeks, then quickly got better. My doctor later said it was likely COVID. I agree with that, John. I think a lot of us did get it. Layla, the ventilators killed people. The remdesivir killed people. I am fully convinced that's what happened to my son's father, Darren, that I hate it. I hate it what I really hate is he took a picture of himself, with the little mask and the ventilator and stuff on, and sent it to me just a couple hours, not knowing that in 2 hours later he was going to go into a massive cardiac arrest because of the remdesivir. Remdesivir just does something to the body where it caused all this fluid buildup and almost caused people to drown in that fluid. I'm not going to get into that, because it's too upsetting. But guys, I got to run. It is almost 9:30. I'm 30 minutes late for work. I got to get busy. But I do appreciate all of you tuning in today. Thank you so much for joining me. We've got a lot more to talk about. What's going on in Iran? We'll talk about that on Monday. We're going to talk about more UFO disclosure, but don't worry about what the government's saying. If you really want to know what's going on with UFO disclosure, go out, listen to Dr. Rogers, listen to people like David Grush. Go back and look at those Tucker interviews. Sean Ryan did some interviews about whistleblower and testimony. There's a lot of information out there. That's where you're going to go to MUFON, UFON, and read people's actual encounters, the things they see, the things they've experienced. Take some of it with a grain of salt, but go in and take a look. That's where your disclosure is. Don't wait for the government to give you disclosure. Disclosure is already here. You just have to go in and find it. And then I'll be curious what you think. If any of you go out and watch a lot of those whistleblower videos, but don't let it shake your faith. I promise you, God is real. There's no doubt in my mind that God is real. And no matter how we were created, how long it took us to be created, what else evolved with us, none of that matters. God still created us. He is still very real. He is still a presence in our life every single day. And I thank God every single morning when I wake up, every night when I go to sleep, that we are so privileged, especially to live here in America, to have our lives and everything we have, all due to God. So thanks, guys. I hope you all have a happy Mother's Day. Good morning, Tammy. And I will look forward to seeing you all Monday. Have a good weekend, everyone. Anything new coming up onto the social media sites. Thanks, guys. I'm Tabitha Hassell with Tabs on Tap.